it's important to acknowledge that in the building industry, that most people get their money from debt. And as we talk more about debt, and as I talk more about equity and the benefits to all, and everybody's going to have a different opinion. But for me, as a seasoned developer, builder, contractor, subcontractor, employees of subcontractors, builders, and I've had anything in between, got over 1,300 units under my belt in one form or the other, whether that is installing cabinets into a unit, all the way up to doing the full development from start to finish. My experience is the only person that ever wins in the hard money game and in the lending game is the banks, is the lender. And people will go in and out of this industry and love it for a bit. And they will, and it will be good, and it will be amazing. But ultimately, what happens is you're going to lose. And you're going to lose for a lot of different reasons, because there's a lot of different things that you control that you have to understand about something. There's things that you control, and there are things that they control. And I'm speaking of the banks, of the lending institutions. The President of the United States, fan or not a fan, has been going after the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates for a long time. And you have to ask yourself, who does the Federal Reserve serve? Do they serve the interest of the people that are borrowing, of the people that are doing, or who do they really serve? And what you realize is very quickly, we are all beholden to the Federal Reserve and what they do with interest rates and what they do. Now, that doesn't mean that what they do with the economy doesn't affect interest rates, but we are beholden to somebody else from a macroeconomic standpoint. And so this isn't a snooze for you, or it's actually entertaining. What you have to understand about that is there's multiple factors in that. So you got a Federal Reserve, you got macroeconomics about what's going on in the world, in the United States. What are they doing with our bonds? What are they doing with, because the bonds, the 10-year bond, that's what it really affects interest rates and does those kind of things. Hard money is typically based on what people are getting at the bank. So what's at the discount window? I believe that's right, is what it's called. But ultimately, all these factors that are not in your control. And then let's talk about local control. You have local areas where people are moving to the area, or they're moving out of the area. And that has nothing to do with what you do in life. You don't have to do anything to lose people's money. You don't have to do anything to default on debt. And my point is you have no control over all of these factors around it. And if you have no control over it, then why would you ever want to be a slave to it? And I know people in my industry, they're going to say I'm full of crap. I know they are. That you have to use debt. But I'm here to tell you, you do not. There are ways to raise money for yourself that mimic debt and the cost of it. There are ways to share with others. There are ways in which you can partner with other people and do the same benefit as debt. See, I'm a firm believer in this. When you put debt on something that is depreciating, like a car, or if you borrow from your credit card to pay your grocery bills, I'm not saying that you don't have to, but let's say that you do that. Those are both items that are, one's perishable, so one just vanishes. The other one is a highly depreciated asset. And call me crazy, but I'd never buy a car again. I would find the cheapest lease I could find on something and I'd take it. Mainly because then it's a fixed cost. I know what it's going on. I'm not trying to gain it back. Or I'd save up all the money and buy the car. The only reason why I'd ever buy a car or truck or whatever that is moving forward is this: if I just had the money to waste. Because we don't build things anymore that last. So knowing that you have all these ways that interest destroys what you're doing, why would you ever want to borrow on it? See, I'm not one of those people that say, hey, you shouldn't have a mortgage. I believe a mortgage is different. And I believe a mortgage makes sense. You have some control over your job, whether you make money or not. We don't live in a life where we're all robots, and although one could argue that we are. But you can go to work and work extra hours, and you can be a slave to that and at least pay your payments. But when you borrow money as a business for speculation, there are a lot of factors that you can control. You can control what you buy it for. You can control what you build it for. You can choose whether I'm going to do the labor myself, I'm going to pay somebody else to do the labor, and you have a little bit of control about that, of the outcome of what happens. But you don't necessarily have control over what things sell for. You don't have control over what things not only sell for, but how long they take to sell. And there are factors that limit, that can limit your, limit any downside risk. And I'm not saying to do that. And you can control how you get investors. You can have better accounting systems that attract people. You can have great marketing that brings in more investors. And then you can have great legal systems. These are all things that make up a development. The 7 keys. You can do all of these things, but you have no control over interest rates. 0. And it's one of the most frustrating things. So knowing that, and knowing that that's how it works, and that's how our system works, why would you ever borrow? And I know why most people do. I know why I borrowed. I borrowed because I'm going to make it work. I borrowed because it enhances the return on my own money and on an investor's money. But it works until it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, you know it. For those who've ever been in this business and dealt with lender issues and dealt with lenders doing really what they want to do, they can control when you get draws. They get to control how often you get draws. And I know they're written into contracts, and we all can hire attorneys and go after each other. But that's a risk factor. From a pure risk standpoint, is that worth the squeeze? Is that worth your time and your effort? And is there a better way to do it? Anybody that knows me knows what I believe in debt. I believe that debt gets a hook into you and it doesn't let go. And that hook has barbed wire on it, or has wire on it. And when it comes out, it takes a part of you. And it's the most infuriating thing when you're going through it. And you can borrow money and do it reasonably. There's no doubt about that. Have more equity, things like that. But what if you could just get rid of it altogether? And you know, I haven't even talked about the worst part of debt. It's the recourse debt. Listen, when you become wealthy, this is the difference between people starting out and the wealthy. The wealthy have access to money you don't have access to. And if they screw up, a lot of times there is a way to get it. Once somebody proves that they can make money on money, then banks love to lend to that in that situation. And they may relax their guarantees on it. But for 99% of all borrowers, you're not borrowing without guarantees. And that's who I'm speaking to. I'm not speaking to the 1 to 5% that don't have to do guarantees. I'm not speaking to the 1 to 5% that have been doing this for 30 years. I'm speaking to the person that may be starting out, or I'm speaking to somebody that's tried to make it work and it just didn't work. And there's ways to put systems in place like we do, but at the end of the day, if you're starting out in this business of development, you have no business borrowing money. The one instance or the couple instances where I do believe that that's a possibility would be two different times. One is if you have the money and you have your own money and your own money is sitting there and you don't want to risk your own money, then in a sense I can see the importance of that. But I believe that you can do equity and it will cost you less than debt. I believe there's huge possibilities in that. And the likelihood of the doing in today's environment is very high. We have come to a point where we don't need debt. We come to a point where we can utilize the equity in the systems. And listen, there's new stuff out there like crypto that you can do all kinds of things from it. There's not a problem in borrowing from your own self. If you want to put money in the bank and borrow from yourself, and they'll allow you to borrow from themselves, at least that if you lose the money is there and you're protected. That's a whole nother ball game. And that's a possibility. There's insurance products out there that you can put the money into the insurance, turn around. Let's say you put $100,000 into a policy, you can turn around and borrow whatever the cash value is that they're saying at that time. Say it's $65,000 or $100,000, that kind of thing. But at least you're borrowing against your own cash value. There's a lot of like money market accounts that you can borrow, or not money market accounts, but wealth advisor accounts that allow you to borrow something into it. And that's wise things. But this blanket statement for all builders and developers and fix and flip guys, that's a bunch of BS. Like, you will get wrecked. And it's not a matter of if, it's when. Like, we got a president, I'm not saying one thing or, but he's gotten wrecked. As a developer, he's gotten wrecked. He's got a excerpt in his book that says, yeah, you see that guy across the street or woman across the street? They're wealthier than I am because he was in over $1 billion of debt. There's one thing about the rich that we all try to do and what we all try to do. What is different about them is what is different about you. And you may look up to them and you may see them. If a rich person is borrowing from a bank and they default, the bank has got a problem. If you borrow from a bank, you got a problem. There's different rules for them than you. And when you understand that, if there's different rules for them than there is you, why would you ever do business like they do it? See, when you're going up, you have to do business differently. And listen, does this mean that you have to grow slower? Yeah, it means that your growth is slower. But profitable growth versus unprofitable growth are two different things. And when you're paying debt out, when you're not profitable, that doesn't make sense. When you're developing properties, when you're the builder, developer, you need every last cent to pay your vendors, to pay the workers. Some of these greatest things in our lives, like buildings and structures, were all built with money. Debt is a tax on people. Make no mistake about that. Debt is a taxation. And we already pay enough taxes. And we should. But to add to that in the form of debt makes no sense whatsoever. And I don't believe it's fruitful for you to do it either. Just like I don't believe it's fruitful to charge on your credit card and then turn around and pay on that for 6 months. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I know people that have made it. You actually see guys, influencers on, and they talk about it. They've gotten to the point where they really don't do business anymore. What they teach is, they teach some other form of how they made it. But they made it, they didn't make it because they were successful at doing this business. They made it because they're successful at selling courses. And that's a big ass difference. Like you gotta be careful about what you look up to and whether something works or something doesn't work. By the time somebody's selling you a product online, they may or not been successful at what they were doing. Maybe they had success. I've had success, but I've had as many successes and failures. And if I told you how I did it, exactly how I did it, and you followed it, you'd lose. Because I've lost. And if we're going to win as a society, then we have to come to the point where we start to recognize that systems are what win. Putting the right systems in, and one of those systems is keep your debt low, keep your leverage as low as possible, if not at zero. And so if you have and in doing so, what does that mean? That just means that you've got to be really good at other things, and you got to figure out the systemization of okay, so if I'm not going to borrow money from the banks or agency or a hard money lender. By the way, they call it hard money for a reason, because hardly anybody ever makes any money. Like, just think that through. Think that through about how that all works. They call it hard money for a reason. One, it's expensive. The default interest on hard money is 25% typically. And what do you need to do to default? Well, technically you need to miss one payment. So you're in the middle of a build and you have an issue, and you get to pay a contract, or you got to pay the contractor. And in that month, you got a choice. Do you pay the contractor, or do you pay the hard money person? Which one are you choosing to do? Well, if you're like me, you would pay the person. But the moment you pay the person, what happens to the hard money person? And invariably what happens is it changes the term. So now you become in default. And so what the transaction portion of it is typically while you're in default, they won't give you any more draws. And so, okay, so you missed a payment, understandable. You go to the next month, but you couldn't do any work during the month, and because you couldn't do any work in the month, you couldn't really pay your people. So now you got a people problem, and now you have an employee problem, and you got people that are pissed off at you. Listen, this is real, and I've been through this. And they really don't understand. They don't understand that we live in a world that is pure debt. Most workers have no clue to this, that one person's debt is another person's equity. And since everything is done off of debt, for the most part, then what you have is a system in which you're using debt all the time. And the average worker doesn't understand that. They're just like, give me my money. I don't care. That's your problem. And so what do? Well, a lot of us go out and borrow more. And I've been down that road in my life, in my businesses. I borrowed more, and I borrowed more, and I borrowed more. And I did it in the name of employees got to be paid, man. We got to pay them. And they do. But it becomes this unsustainable business eventually. You just have to ask yourself, what do you want for yourself? Like, what is it that, what is it that you are going to do differently than everybody else to make it work? Because most of them aren't making it work. What you see on social media doesn't mean it works. And it doesn't mean it's ever worked. It's definitely employed people. I've watched like 3 major downturns in my life, 4. And it is really disheartening to know the people that are doing it. And 99% of them are not bad, but they're put in bad situations, and because they're put in bad situations, they make bad decisions, and bad decisions ultimately cost you something, regardless of whether you meant it to or not. It always costs you something. And is that really what you want to do? Is that how you see everything working out in your life? Because honestly, I don't. I'm at the point of my life where it's a little fearful for my own family every time you borrow money, because we have no control over what's going on. And dang it, when everything is amazing out there, when everything is amazing, it works, and it works so well. There's a thing that I've read, and I just can't remember what but rain falls on the just and the unjust. And that's exactly what happens in business. That situations happen. I once had a situation where one of my project managers, there was a tree that was right on the property line. Plans clearly did it. He cut the tree down. Cut the freaking tree down. It probably had a 2-foot wide base. The next door neighbor was an attorney. And when it was all said and done, we paid him $98,000. The employee still got paid. I paid attorney cost. Insurance did take care of, I believe it was 2/3 of it. And all of us would sit around and say, well, that's what you get. That's what you get. No, that's not what you get. When did we become a society that we have to have blame for everything? Like somebody made a mistake. Somebody made an honest mistake. But because we live in a litigious society, anybody can sue anybody. It's a tree. It's a tree, people. And we've gotten to the point where we're so angry about it, and we're so like, this should never happen, that we don't have the sensibility about it. And so I'd done everything wrong. I actually didn't do anything wrong as a business. But that tree was gone. And it costs money. And that's the kind of thing that comes up anytime you're developing. And you have all these factors in development and building that are out of your control. I've watched an employee cut his finger, cut his hand. You got workers' comp, it pays for it. But the anguish in time creates anguish. Or somebody gets hurt on their job. I remember growing up, my dad was part of a painting company. One of the painters fell off the scaffolding, or somehow the scaffolding disconnected and somebody fell. Nobody is negligent. Nobody was purposely negligent. But these are unknown factors that happen in the building industry, that when things are going on, and we can't just sit here and pretend, well, if I've got borrowed money and we don't control the how much we're going to pay in that borrowed money, then it all comes back to, there are so many factors that are uncontrollable, it would make no sense to do it. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have insurance or any of those kind of things, but it just doesn't make sense. Why would you ever want to borrow? And for me and my businesses, we're going to take it out. We're going to take that debt out. We're going to be at a point where we're using, regardless of if it's other people's money, and there's nothing wrong with using other people's money as long as you are a good steward of it. But it's a lot easier to be a steward of people's money when you have the money. When you borrow debt, you don't have the money. It's in somebody else's hands, and they get to choose on when they give you a draw or not. And when it's your own money, you don't. Like, think about that next time. What I have to say is a warning to you. Don't borrow. Because eventually it will destroy you.